Hello, I'm Tamara Banks, and welcome back to this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. Mitch, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Tamara.
And we have some really hardworking guests today. Thank you so much for joining us, Julie Madden and Lilas Rajaee. Thank you for being here. First, start with the type of work that you're doing, a little bit about your background, each of you, and how you work together.
Sure, go ahead. I'm the liaison for the Denver Alliance for Drug Endangered Children and the Justice Initiative for Drug Endangered Families. It's a joint collaborative that's housed in the Denver District Attorney's Office. And my efforts as a liaison are really to align all the systems that are involved to prioritize identification of and services for children and families who have substance abuse issues and justice system involvement. And I've been working with this initiative since about 2006 when it was created with the help of Lilas.
So I am the Director of Task and Treatment Court Programming for juvenile and family-related cases with Denver Juvenile Court. And Task is basically, we serve as a substance abuse and mental health component for the court system. So our job is to work with families who have very serious substance abuse and mental health issues, advocate for them, hold them accountable, get them help, and hopefully get them out of the system.
And so in the intro, we talked about drug endangered children, and it's now moving that word into families. And I know covering meth lab busts at these homes and these officers coming out in their hazmat suits and carrying these little children, 2, 3-year-old, sometimes smaller, younger children. Talk a little bit about how the meth drug has sort of catapulted a focus away from just the children and into families.
Well, it was really the catalyst for the DEC movement. There was never a question asked, what about the children? Are there children in a home where these substances are being manufactured? What's happening to the kids after a bust at a home? And there were no programs that really served families that asked about children. So in 2003, was it 2003? There was a SAMHSA grant awarded to Lilas. It's called the Meth Prevention Initiative. And it really was eye-opening for everyone that was involved because over the course of 3 years, questions were asked about children. Do you have kids in the house? Are you caretaking for a relative? And I believe 300 children were identified that had never been served before. They weren't provided anything related to the trauma they were experiencing because of the parental substance use or any of the medical hazards that were associated with those. So it was a real eye-opening time back in about 2003.
Actually in 2006. So just to give you a little bit of history, one of the things that I helped to do was to start the Family Integrated Drug Court in Denver. And that program focuses on substance abusing parents who are at risk of losing their children and who also are involved with the criminal justice system. In 2006, I went to a meeting on drug endangered children, which I had never heard of the concept, quite frankly. And as Dr. Kathy Wells with the Family Crisis Center, she was talking about how substance-exposed infants, how the dangers and developmental effects and all of these things, how bad it was. I was kind of stunned in my chair that I was thinking, I can think of every parent who's in our Family Integrated Drug Court. I didn't know the name of one child. And these were families who had child welfare involvement, but we still never talked about the children. So that was really, an aha moment for me in that we need to quit just focusing on the quote unquote offender and really start, integrating prevention and early intervention for children as well.
And Tamara, that's really, depending on when you came into this, my memory of it is that it really was driven by those narcotics agents that were going into these homes and finding these toddlers, some of them crawling through hypodermic needles, and they would have the marks from that, not having been fed because their mother or their caretaker was out and had been asleep for days. And they were coming out with these kids who were contaminated that needed to be treated. And it was like, what do we do? And so we all kind of got together and said, this is what we need to do. And Dr. Wells, and we've had some great leaders, and we've talked about this on this show. And we've been working this problem and dealing with the situation. And then it's kind of evolved into what the next step was. And the next step really was, if you have somebody in the criminal justice system, they have a family. Do they have kids? What have they been exposed to? Are they watching their father or their mother using? Are they getting exposed to these narcotics? Is there a possibility they can be getting into these narcotics? So it really was the next step. And to get the grants and the things that we did, Lilas, we couldn't be doing this without her help and what she has really driven through. But the really the sad part of this happened and started in some very, very bad places for kids to be. And the hope is that we are picking that up now and the kids aren't exposed to it the way that they were and really making a difference in this area.
Mitch talked about some of the hypodermic needles that the kids, are crawling around on or gets stabbed in the foot. What are some of the other things that kids face and see when they're in these homes?
So, huge domestic violence and traumatization for kids. They are seeing things like pornography, they are seeing illegal activity, they are in crisis all of the time. Their normal is much different than what normal is for me and my family, as an example. Julie was talking about this meth prevention grant we had. The 300 children who we identified all demonstrated traumatic exposure. And what we know about trauma is it is the most treatable and least diagnosed disorder among children. So,
we've been talking about children. Are there other members of the family that need focus and attention?
Absolutely. It's really turned into a whole family approach, a real holistic approach, and it's not just immediate family members now. It's aunts and uncles. It's grandma who's a caretaker.
And so it sounds like this isn't just one prong. This is a multi-pronged approach. Can you talk about some of the partners that you're working with?
Sure. Before the initiative, I think, and Mitch, you probably agree, that all the different agencies were really operating in silos. There was no collaboration, and people were really missing the boat when it came to serving the family in a best practices approach. Since the initiative, there's a formalized collaboration between the courts, law enforcement, child welfare, treatment providers. The district attorney's office is a huge part of it. So it's really been a big paradigm shift in how we're serving families in Denver.
It was almost like no one was asking the question. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, you're standing here in front of me getting sentenced for a narcotics case. I'm going to give you probation. I'm going to get you in treatment, all those things as a judge. Right. But I'm not asking the questions about your family, the impact it's having on your kids, those kinds of things. And then I'll be sitting at a sentencing on a murder case or a serious assault case or a sexual assault on a child case, and they're saying, don't punish me because I have these kids. And so I think what it was just getting the different groups to talk to each other about a more holistic approach to dealing with the situation, because we know the trauma and the things that these kids are exposed to. Sometimes they are victims in these homes, that if we don't do something about them, then I'm going to be a real old man, but somebody else is going to have to deal with them as the next generation of drug addicts, of predators, potentially victims. So to take this kind of approach really just made sense. And sometimes being in this business for 30 years, you wonder, where were we 25 years ago? Why does it always take something like a meth house to make these kinds of changes? But the good news is we've done it, and we're continuing to advance. So, it's really proud of this group, and that everybody kind of put down their guard and did something that was important for the community.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about some of those programs? We can't talk about every single program you have, but it sounds like you have a number of them that are really successful. Are there one or two that really you want to highlight and tell us about?
Well, we do have several programs, but they all have the same mission. I mentioned our Family Integrated Drug Court program, and that's a program with fantastic results when it comes to lowering criminal recidivism, lowering substance abuse, preventing people from going back to jail, and helping to reunify parents with their children. And the way that's done, again, it's a multidisciplinary effort. But what my office does is we take very much of an aggressive and advocacy-based approach to engaging and retaining these families. We do not use the mentality, especially at the beginning, that we will never work harder than the family. Because quite frankly, with this population, oftentimes we're working much harder than they are, at least at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a 24/7 approach to, finding out where they are, getting them motivated and helping them through the process.
And you also have a program, I think, called the Children Affected by Methamphetamine?
And that's part of this Family Integrated Drug
I
Court
see.
program.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you talked a little bit about what makes it such a success. It's a multi-pronged approach, but anything else that's new that you hadn't tried before that has really made programs like this successful?
Well, I mean, one of the components would be the law enforcement advocacy program. And again, that's through the Denver Police Department and demonstrates, how we've kind of shifted with our traditional roles and responsibilities. Mm-hmm. We have police officers working with these families as mentors, as life coaches, working with children so that they're not afraid or hate the police. It's been really an interesting few years.
Oh, I bet. It sounds really exciting.
And it might help to understand the families a little bit more. They're really the highest risk, highest need families in Denver, and they come from multi-generational cycles of substance abuse, criminal justice involvement, domestic violence. I mean, it's the most difficult population you could work with, and so for them to be coming out of these programs not using substances, improving their family functioning, having relationships with law enforcement that are very positive, it's a pretty amazing thing to see.
Do you have a benchmark that you can say, oh, we've had some successes here? What does success really look like?
For this program specifically, for JIDEF overall, we've seen some really great outcomes in terms of substance use. So when families enter the programs, 100% are using substances, and at discharge, 42% see a reduction in alcohol use and 52% see a reduction in drug use. And then we have a less than 10% recidivism rate for families while they're enrolled in the programs.
That's pretty amazing.
So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
You think about it, these are the most addicting narcotics that we have. Obviously, alcohol causes us a ton of trouble in the criminal justice system. We're talking about things like methamphetamine, heroin, those types of narcotics, cocaine. Extremely hard to get people clean and sober when they're addicted to these kind of narcotics. Mm-hmm. I mean, the impact on the brain and the pleasure systems, all of that we have, these drugs attack that. So the idea of having those, some people might say, well, those aren't great successes, but they are, because we know we're tackling the toughest, most addictive substances that we have out there.
And like you said earlier, no one ever asked the question, what about the kids? What about the rest of the family?
What about the kids? What about the family? Mm-hmm. It was a question that went unasked for years and years. We started to look at it because we had to. Here were these little kids that had to be decontaminated because we were finding them in places where it was toxic, where we've had detectives that were exposed to it over the years come down with cancer, that type of thing. So we had kids in those, and we had great help from National Jewish. They went in with an expert and told us exactly what these kids were being exposed to and wrote papers about it. And we base this on science. We base this on best practices. We base it on things that we believe are going to be a success, and we're seeing those successes now.
Right. Yes. I'm really interested to hear about sort of painting a picture, a case, a typical case, and maybe one that was a successful outcome.
Sure. I can think of one which involved a mother and her child. Mom had been, cooking and using and selling methamphetamine for well over a decade. Her children were raised with different relatives. The kid that I'm thinking of actually was a drug-endangered child. And guess what? Drug-endangered children are not all little cute kids. They grow up and they still have all of the same trauma that was never addressed. So this kid hit our court system through a delinquency petition, and everybody, the kid was a challenging kid. Nobody ever asked where the mother was. And mom had been released from prison, and she would come to every meeting and stand at the door. If they did know she was there, they wouldn't let her in. She also had little kids at home, and she still is a recovering methamphetamine addict. And, so we've been able to, she's done most of the work, but this is a family where mom is not returned to prison. She's gainfully employed. Have there been a few slip-ups? Yes. But talk about looking bad on paper. That was her.
Yeah.
And she's just been, it's just been a really nice example of what can go well in the criminal justice system.
How long does it get to move the needle that far?
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends. There's no specific recipe for success. Everybody comes in at different points in their lives. And again, this was, a woman who spent a long time in prison. She went back to prison. It was all around methamphetamine. And, today she's a chef and continues to get therapy, and she's doing great. Yeah.
And as we're focusing on drug-endangered families, I was stunned to find out that, parental abuse is a factor in 50 to 80% of child welfare cases. That's amazing.
The big problem, I think, is that the way it had been viewed previously was that child welfare was solely responsible for these children. And the reality is they're not. We have to be working, all these systems have to work together to serve these children for the best outcomes.
Right.
We can't put the onus on child welfare alone.
I'm curious about how the legalization of marijuana, both the medical and recreational, has impacted your work.
It's, of course, a polarizing issue, but it's, our stance is that there's no safe use of marijuana for the justice-involved population. You cannot use it safely around children at all. There can be no harm reduction approach. It's a prevention solely.
Well, one of the questions that came up was in our drug court when they legalized it, and all of our clients in drug court went out and got their cards. They thought, okay, now we're trying to get people clean and sober. Mm-hmm. And so the issue was, can somebody that's in drug court, Denver drug court, use marijuana? And we went around a little bit with the chief judge, and finally we got to the point where, no, you can't. You're trying to get clean and sober. You can't drink. You can't use marijuana. That is a mind-altering thing that impacts you. Some of these things that we've seen over the course of time in these grows in homes, we've got kids that are exposed to things nearly as toxic as they were being exposed to in meth labs. Now, of course, the meth labs would blow up on occasion, and we don't see that in the grows. But people need to understand that what goes on when you grow a lot of marijuana is the spores and the mold that go along with it get into your respiratory system, and they have an impact on that. So when we're impacting young children that are developing their lung strength, those types of things, that's going to have an impact on the health of that child. And then, of course, there's the attitude change that we're seeing in our kids. And that is, hey, this is okay, this is cool. I'm just not old enough to use it yet. So if I can get it, I can use it because my parents do, that type of thing. So really, the potential for a large step backwards in all of the things that we've been trying to accomplish for the last decade or so, when we dealt with other narcotics, we're seeing this as almost a frontal assault on that. But we're going to have to deal with it. We deal with legal substances. Alcohol, like I said earlier in the show, causes us an incredible amount of problems. We get people killed on our highways. We have domestic violence around alcohol. We have kids that suffer the same kind of trauma, listening to their father beat their mother because their father's a drunk. We know that that's going on in that post-traumatic stress. So we deal with it with the illegal substances. Now we have another legal substance. But the problems are there, and the things that they create in our system are very real and are going to continue. And, I don't predict things. I just tell people what's going on. But I think that you'd have to be out of your mind to not think that it's going to cause more problems as it becomes more and more acceptable.
And I think it's important to talk about the families, the type of families we're talking about here specifically. Right. That it maybe you're not talking about families who everybody has a job and going to school on a regular basis. These folks have some various challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're talking about families where there is, multi-generational criminal justice involvement, child welfare involvement, history of drug addiction, poverty. We're not talking about the family who they have a home and they're gainfully employed and they want to go have a drink at the end of the day. It's apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm. I was also really happy to hear about this other program that you have, where you have an officer who actually mentors a family. Talk to me about that, because I don't think people understand how integrated some families have a relationship with the judicial system, and this is a way to do it in a positive way.
Yeah. So about 10 years ago, I think it was, there was a high-profile police-related fatality in Denver, and there was a lot of community distrust of the police. And I had an idea, and I went and I spoke with Chief Whitman, and I said, hey, what if we could come up with something that would improve public safety but also improve citizens' perceptions of the police? So I pitched my idea, and he let me try it. And we took a couple of officers and trained them in some therapeutic techniques and told them, your job is to get these people to like you and hopefully get, the offender in the family not to reoffend, etc. So that's how we started. And what we found out over time was that not only with kids, but also adults, when they needed support, when they were in crisis, when they were about to relapse, the person they called first was their law enforcement advocate. And we saw huge reductions in rearrests of the people that we worked with, reductions in substance abuse, and the young children in the home who were taught to either hate or fear the police because they've seen their parents arrested so many times. They started referring to the officers as their cop, which is
that's
pretty
huge,
refreshing, very huge, yeah.
And I know a lot of your programs have given you some national recognition.
I mean, the Law Enforcement Advocate Program specifically, this past year was awarded through the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, the Weber Seavey Award, which it's an international award. We were picked out of the top 5 in the entire world, awarded for the innovation for this program. So that was pretty amazing. And then we were semifinalists for the previous 4 years.
Wow.
So
that's great.
It's a fantastic program.
We just have about 20, 30 seconds. Mitch, anything you'd like to say to kind of wrap up and how important this group is to your office?
Well, it's so important not only to my office, but I think to the community and to those kids that are out there that need our help. Kids don't vote, and oftentimes I think they get left out because of that. Their voice is not heard. And this group, based on seeing a lot of horrible things that were happening to kids, stepped up and did something about it. And what I like about it is everybody, like I said, put down their guard and stepped up and did something. Those police officers, they didn't need to be involved in that program, but they got involved in it. And I've seen the difference that it's made in young men that are parents, in those kinds of skills that they're getting. So this is important. And the benefit is to our city and to taxpayers because it saves money and prevents crime. Absolutely. And that's why this is such an important program. And I want to thank you two guys for coming on.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
Thank you to Julie Madden and Lilas Rajaee. Thank you so much, and keep up the great work. The community definitely needs you. That wraps it up for this edition of Dialogue Denver DA. I'm Tamara Banks. We'll see you next time.
Denver 8 TV, your city, your source.